Welcome to the Q-MindBody podcast. My name is Darren. In this podcast, we explore all things having to do with gay men's health, wellness, and spirituality. In today's episode, we're going to talk about something that I hear about from so many of you in messages on Facebook and Instagram and comments on YouTube and just messaging and from students, that it's so hard to find intentional community among gay men. And so I am bringing in the absolute pro to talk about that. His name is David Moreno, and he has been teaching for ever. Like David and I'm not sure if he's been teaching longer than me, but I think he has. And I view him as like just a source of great inspiration. He's also an openly gay man and has done a tremendous amount of work building community among men in general and gay men specifically. So he's got a lot to share. Before we get to that, a few things. You can learn more about David. His website is more yoga, MOR yoga.com. I will put a link to that in the show notes. And you can also connect with him on social media. This episode is being supported by the Gay Wellness website, where you can find teachers and healers of all stripes that support gay men. And you can check that out. They have a special page hosting a lot of these episodes. And you can find a massage therapist or a yoga teacher or a coach or a psychotherapist in your area if you need one. And you can connect with me. I will put links to all of my websites and social media accounts as well. Finally, if you have comments about what we're talking about or suggestions for other future episodes, please be sure to drop them in the comment section of Spotify or YouTube, and I will consider creating a podcast episode just for you. So with that, I am going to bring in David, and we're going to talk about creating community among gay men. David, how are you?
Good morning.
It is so good to see you. It seems like the only way I get to see you these days, because you're busy, I'm busy, is to do a podcast interview. So it brought us together.
It's a phone call, right? It's a phone call.
And we're long overdue for dinner.
Yeah.
So I want to hear just a little bit about you. I also want to make a quick announcement that I've started a gay men's sangha here in the Bay Area in San Francisco, and currently we're meeting on the last Friday of every month at the Castro Room. And I'm going to be bringing in some guest teachers, and David is going to be one of them. So I'm excited. And at the end, we will talk a little bit about what your plans are for that. But before we get to all of that, tell us a little bit about you.
A little bit about me, specifically from my yoga life. I've had many lives and have always had concurrent careers. So just sticking straight to the yoga part of me, I began doing yoga in the late 70s and in Los Angeles, when you had to drive 45 minutes even in the city to find a yoga instructor. And then built upon a more full practice when I started studying with T.S. Little in Santa Fe. T.S. was one of my main instructors. I began teaching for him when he went off to India one summer. You know how we used to go to India to study with our teachers, and he gave me the keys to the studio and said, please teach the Saturday morning class, and I'll be back in a month. And I've been teaching a Saturday morning class at 9:00 in 3 different states ever since that time. Some of the other teachers were John Friend, Richard Friedman, Amy Grover, some of the senior teachers that were the first to go to India and come back to, teach yoga in the States.
Yeah. Your yoga practice, I'm assuming, is similar to mine in that it was, I think gay men, especially gay men of a certain age, like you started teaching in the 70s, so you way predate me. I started teaching in the 90s, early 90s. But my yoga practice was really an important part of my spirituality. I think specifically because I had so much shame around my body, around my sexuality, having been raised at that time. I mean, that stuff still exists today, but it was really bad back in the early days, right after Stonewall and then the AIDS crisis. So I'm wondering if you could reflect just a little bit about how your practice of yoga intersected with your experience as a gay man and how it may have evolved over time or supported you in any way.
Yeah, well, first of all, I didn't start teaching in the 70s. I didn't start teaching until the early 90s as well. But, um, I came to yoga from a dance background. And in dance, there was always this sense of competition of like, oh my God, like, am I enough? There's that constant self-judgment, that constant reevaluation and comparison to everybody else. And when I pulled away from that community and started doing yoga full time, one of the things that I loved the most was that I was no longer that concerned about what other people were thinking about me, because I was so involved in the practice. It sucked me in so deeply and it affected me so profoundly that I didn't have time to be assessing myself around others. Even in a room full of people, it's still like, you're
Yeah.
still in your own zone if you're doing the practice. If you're distracted, of course not. But being pulled in like that and doing practices like Ashtanga and Iyengar, which were so demanding that I didn't really have time to be comparing myself as much as I had when I was in my dad's
Yeah.
life.
Um, when I don't even remember when you did this, but I love that you did it. It was maybe the early 2000s, correct? The decades, they fly
Mm-hmm.
by.
Mm-hmm.
When you started the men's Kula, and
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you could say what a Kula is for those people who don't know. I always
Yeah.
think of it as like Kool-Aid. um, but and what is it, and what did you do? What was that? I know, but some of the listeners
Yeah.
might not, because I think it's an important piece of your story.
Yeah. Well, I had worked with an organization called Spirit Journeys, like starting in the 80s, which brought groups of gay and bisexual men to sacred sites all over the world as a focus, right? As we're going into a spiritual zone, we're bringing community together. This was different from the cruise ships and all the other kinds of gay tourism that was evolving at that time. And I had been teaching at a conference where a friend of mine, Shiva Ray, was teaching, and Shiva Ray taught these women's temples, and I was going, what are you doing there? What are you doing there? I was like, I'm going to go in, I'm going to put a wig on, I'm going to come in, I'm going to, bamboozle my way in. And I thought, well, God, why don't we have this for guys? Why don't we have a course just for guys? And also at that time in the evolution of yoga, or in the evolution of commercial yoga, um, you know, women had taken it over. Women were primarily the main teachers, like during the 90s and 2000s. And a lot of men coming into yoga for the first time, that's the world they experienced. They just thought, oh, this is women teach this.
Yeah.
It's like, so, didn't even know that there was a whole history of teaching father to son, grandfather to grandson, uncle to nephew. There's the whole line of how this was passed down, and always in relationship to another man. And I thought, wow, what would that be like if I had learned yoga from my dad or from my uncle or from my grandfather? And
Yeah.
so I developed this program called Men's Kula. A Kula is from the tantric term. It's a tantric term meaning intentional community, which is different from Sangha, which was more renunciates type of community. That's why it's often used in Buddhism. And I started developing this program where men could come together to practice, And not only that, but I brought in guest teachers, much like you're doing with your program, um, in order to keep that fluidity of community, to keep lifting up. And also, Kula means, like in the Tantric tradition, these are householders that are doing this teaching, that are doing this study together. And so it had that feeling of like bringing
Yeah.
in other householders to share their path.
Yeah. So you just for clarity, the term householder, you
Mm,
mean one who is there's like the path of the monk, so to speak, or the yogi who goes and doesn't take a wife or family, and the
right.
householder is one
Yes. Yes.
who does.
Where the householder is paying the bills, going to work and coming home,
Yeah.
doing practices before you go, doing practices when you come home, so you're
Yeah.
in the world and not a renunciate. Yeah.
So I'm sure you've heard this in your work. I hear
Mhm.
it all the time with just in the work I do, as well as like just talking to gay friends. Uh, Community, we're sort of good at throwing a party
Mhm.
and and being very festive. I mean, our parades are fabulous. And yet, in spite of all that, we seem to have difficulty creating more intentional communities where we go deeper,
Mhm.
where it's something beyond just campy chit chat about RuPaul's Drag Race.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering maybe why you think that is.
Mhm.
And since you've sort of done this before, like, do you have any advice for how? I mean, there's getting involved in a group like yours or like the Gay Men's Sangha that I'm starting, but even going beyond that, just like in your circle of friends or creating a new circle of friends if need be, so that you can go deeper when it seems so elusive for so many of us.
I totally agree with that. And I think it's one of the inspirations for creating programs like Spirit Journeys, like Men's Kula. It was because, one, I didn't feel that comfortable just in the other world. I mean, I could go in and out of it, and that was fun, but it never satisfied me in like a deep way. And so it is challenging, and one of the things that we did in both groups was to, always have a heart circle, always have people sharing, always people bringing something, even minimal sharing, just like a couple of words or whatever it was. And then we would always go out for like breakfast as a group, as many that could join in, so that you could continue that sharing outside of, you know, the practice itself.
Yeah. Did you ever see the movie Latter Days? It was
I did
like
not.
it was a great movie about two gay men. One of them being a Mormon missionary boy who's very much in the closet, and another who's more of like a classic pretty boy party West Hollywood. And they meet and they fall in love. That's the basic story. But at one point, the one who is more liberated, he's and he starts this interacting with the Mormon boy who's very devout and spiritual. Um, he starts to question: is the hookup thing that I keep doing, is it really worth it? And so he's with this trick, and he's like, "Can we talk?" And the guy's like, "Who's my dirty boy?" And he's like, "No, no, I want to talk. I want to get to know you." And the other guy's like, "I don't know what kind of kinky stuff you're into, but I'm out of here." And it's sort of funny, but at the same time, it's prevalent. It's funny because there's some truth to it. Like to sit and talk and have a conversation, and for you and I to connect on a deeper level. Go hook up with a stranger, fine, no problem. But to go deeper, um, is that elusive thing that is so hard for us. Um, so tell me a little bit about how that went. Like, did you find that men were hungry for it? Did you find
Yeah.
they were resistant to it? Was it an easy sell or a hard sell?
Yeah. Well, first of all, what was interesting when I started doing it as a monthly program at the studio in Berkeley, we had to do it before the other classes that were already on the schedule, meaning, the 9 o'clock Sunday morning class, meaning we had to be in there like at 7 in the morning. And people like just drag themselves down there, And also, this program, I never distinguished between this is a gay men's Kula or a straight guy's Kula or anything in between Kula. It was simply yoga Kula. It was called men's Kula yoga for guys. And so it was a mix of straight and gay men and bisexual men. So when it started, we would have like 30 people show up on a Sunday morning, half asleep at 7 a.m., and people, they complained about getting there, but once they got there, they're like, oh my God, I so needed that. And, people were going through divorces and this and that, and everybody had something to share. And if we would go and talk afterwards, that would, not the whole group, but whoever could would join in afterwards. And it basically it lasted for several years, and then it just started to, change. And so it came to its natural end. But the first people to understand the value of a men's gathering were women. It was like so many wives, girlfriends sent their guy down they go, this is going to be great for you. Go do this. I mean, they got it. Women get like the importance of community and the importance of circle.
Well, it's fascinating to me that yoga was so patriarchal for most of its existence. The vast, vast majority of the thousands of years yoga has been around has been very patriarchal. In some circles, women were forbidden from learning it. And yet when it hit the West and it was very co-ed and open to pretty much anyone, women really took it and ran with it. And men were like, yeah, I'm not into that. I think women frequently have been trailblazers in that way. Did you find that there was a quantitative difference between maybe the reasons why or how it was received between queer men and straight men? Or did everybody just sort of come together and at the end of the day, we're just men, and the fact that who we sleep with was largely irrelevant to the community we're building?
Well, it certainly didn't affect our practicing together, right? The funny thing to me was that most of the male teachers that I invited just happened to be gay. It's like the majority of there's a large majority of gay yoga instructors. But it didn't really come up as an issue. And I think the beautiful thing about having breakfast afterwards or having a meal together afterwards is that, people are talking about their humanity. They're talking about the relationship they're having trouble with, or the work they're having trouble with, or the kids that they're having trouble with. And that just brought people together. It was like no one who showed up there ever had an issue with, at least in any obvious way. And people would even come from out of town to join us. So,
let's talk a little bit about. I've invited you in to, I'm really, really excited when I'm sort of making, it's like building the airplane in mid-flight. I don't really know what I'm doing, and that's why it'll probably work, because I'm just like, here we go. But I was really clear that I wanted to bring in people other than me, because it shouldn't be about me. It should be about we. But I was thinking, like, who would be a good person to bring in? And you were at the very top of the list, to just share some of your wisdom and some of your ideas with the men that show up. What are you thinking you might do with us?
The most important thing is always that we come together. That's the bottom line, is that we just show up together, and what we do and how we do it and how we get there and, where we zoom to will happen really, in the moment. But, I'll use combinations of Qigong, yoga, somatic movement, anything to bring us deeper connection with ourselves, with our body, and therefore with each other. You talked earlier about like, why is it so difficult for men to like not build this community? Yoga, bottom line, is about intimacy with self. And if you don't have intimacy with self, you're not going to have intimacy with somebody else, no matter what the fantasy is.
Yeah.
So we will come together in an intimate way of sharing and being together, breathing together, moving together, all for the purpose of just dropping in. And then, I'm a Ayurvedic follower, so I always practice different practices, different times of the day. It's an evening class. You don't need to be doing, a hot, sweaty class as you go into the evening. It can be more gentle, more nourishing, more preparatory for rest.
The last group, the first one we did, again, I wasn't sure. I thought I might be the only one sitting there alone in the room. I thought that's okay. If people aren't interested, they're not interested. But I looked at the roster of people who had signed up, and there were like 35 people. And without even really trying very hard to promote it or push it very hard, and the thing that was fascinating was the diversity of men. We had men as old as 70 and as young as 14 that showed up.
Sweet.
So I'm like, wow, I can't imagine finding yoga or the fact that I was gay and having my dad drop me off at some gay men's gathering at 14. It's just inconceivable to me. And all different body types. Some people who have done a lot of yoga, but a lot of people who have not done much at all, which is fine. But all sort of wanting to come together, sort of in what you're saying, in community. And it was interesting to see some of the men who were sort of nervous. I think, again, to go to the bar right underneath the studio, would probably feel comfortable and familiar, but to come and be vulnerable with other gay men in a different sort of way felt a bit much. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about how we can, whether it's in this case or in others, how we can help men. I think it's natural to feel nervous and vulnerable if you're trying something new, but how we can support each other in working through that. It's okay to feel that. We just don't want to give into it, you're so good at creating community and support and making people feel safe. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how we can do that.
Well, what came up was that I think for each person that shows up, there's this intuition that says, go to this. Something got you to that circle, right? Something got you to that gathering, that room, that practice. Trust that. Trust that, because everybody that's there was motivated by some part of them that said, yes, you need this. So listen to that part, honor that part. Yes, the bubbly and the fear will still be there. The bubbly is in that kind of bubbly. That's my best advice. Trust the part of you that wants to be there, and allow for the fear to be there, or the anxiety or the depression, whatever shows up for you. But turn to that part that went like, yeah, you need this. It's like sometimes when you see like, I don't know, you just see something in the paper that you go like, oh yeah, I want to go to this. Some part of you just knows instantly. And there are very few decisions in our lives that are that clear. So when it comes up, really trust it and run with it.
As you were saying that, you were obviously talking about a group like this, but I was thinking about my own, and I think this is true for a lot of people, my own coming out of not trusting that desire to have sex. But I think it was even deeper than that, to connect with other men on a more intimate level. I was shamed for having those feelings. And So I didn't trust it, didn't trust it, and finally gave into it, and finally said, you know what? I wasn't given this impulse, this desire, this curiosity for nothing, right? And if I trust it and follow it, I wonder where it'll take me. And the freedom that comes with that is immense, right? If you have a curiosity, even
Mm-hmm.
follow it. The worst case scenario, you don't have a very good time.
Mm-hmm.
But the chances are there's something there that you really need, that, your heart's longing for.
I totally
Uh,
agree. And, I started with abuse, physical abuse, learning disabilities, all of this, and so all the regular channels for, moving through life were kind of like blocked off because I couldn't go through those doors because I had stuff with me, trauma with me. So I had to go around it. And the only way that I could go around it was to trust where I was being directed, what was going on, what was next, no matter what it looked like. And over time, I can see this pattern of like, wow, I would have never have done these things if I just didn't follow my heart. It sounds so much like a cliche, and it's so relevant.
hmm. um, Now, people who obviously, I hope people come to the Gay Men's Sangha, but a lot of people don't live in the Bay Area.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering how people can connect with you more. Like, what types of travel teaching do you do? Online teaching do you do?
Mhm.
If they live in the Bay Area, how can they connect with you and learn more about you here? Obviously, I'll put a link to your website, moryoga.com. But just maybe an overview of how the types of offerings you have and where they can connect with you.
Well, thank you for that. I used to teach internationally a lot and take groups with me all over the place. And I've really kind of come down to being more localized of late. So I'm teaching a lot in Marin at Green Gulch. I have an amazing retreat, a weekend retreat calling it Aging, Dying, and Awakening, the yoga of aging, dying, and awakening. This will be a time, this is like practice, community, sharing, writing. These are open for all my students. Um, and so besides regular weekly classes, I have these weekend or day long retreats, including my silent retreat in November, which is a meditation retreat, meditation and mindful movement retreat. That's where I can really go in deep. That's where and that's where we sit in a community that's, not an hour and a half class, but a full day or a full
Yeah.
weekend.
So it's a silent retreat. How are you going to
One
get
of
gay
them,
men to go to that if they're not
one of
allowed
them.
to gossip and
It's not, believe me, it's not just the gays that have, anybody that's meditated finds that as like a delicious
yeah,
proposition. But when we're new to it, it sounds like, oh my God, how would I be if
yeah,
I'm not talking? It's like, well, all the talking's going on in your head anyway. So it's really easy to,
yeah,
give it a chance, give it a break. But the
yeah,
other ones aren't. I always have some silent periods in most of my retreats, but not the whole day like that particular one.
yeah. I frequently on my retreats do like noble silence from
Hmm.
like bedtime
Hmm.
or pretty early in the evening
Hmm.
to after morning practice, and sometimes even include breakfast, so they can
Hmm.
people can just like get up and be with themselves and do their
Hmm.
practice, and then maybe even sit and eat and commune with their bowl of oatmeal or whatever. And at first, people really resist that. But by the end of the retreat, they're like, I'm going to do this when I go home.
Absolutely.
It's such a
I've
gift.
I've had married couples and just partnered couples, and on these retreats, and they're so used to just getting up and start, like before you're like even out of bed, and to give them that space and just like, okay, I'm with my beloved, but I'm also going to just get up and you know,
Yeah.
experience a little bit of me before I start connecting fully in that way. And same thing by the end of the retreat, they're going like, "Oh my God, we're going to do this when we get home."
Yeah. I have long been of the belief that couples, gay and straight,
Mhm.
we do. There's a lot of people going to therapy and talking about their issues, and I think there's value in that. But I think there's an equal value in not talking, not ignoring each other, being present to each other, but not just filling every minute with
Mm,
blah 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 blah
mm,
blah.
mm, mm,
um, David, I am so thrilled to get you on this podcast, and I want to have you back. There's about 50 topics I want to talk
mm.
to you about.
Great.
And I'm thrilled that you're going to be a guest teacher, presenter. I'm trying to figure out how we're going to get a cake for you to jump out of. um, for the Gay Men Sangha. And I will put links to your website, More Yoga, MOR yoga.com, and also to the Gay Men Sangha information. Whether you can make this one or one in the future, we'd love to see you there. We will be posting this on YouTube and on Spotify and putting some clips on Instagram and Facebook. So check those out. And you can drop me a message if you have any topics or guests you think I should have on this podcast, because I really want this to be a community conversation, bringing to light topics like the one we chatted about today. David, do you have any closing thoughts you would like to, any parting wisdom you'd like to instill?
Just be kind to yourself and know that you're enough. If we can go away with that, we'll have a great day.
Yeah. That is great advice and shockingly difficult. You would think being kind to yourself would be like, oh, okay, I'll go be nice to myself, but pay attention to your inner dialogue and what you do. And would you be friends with a person that treated you the way you treat yourself, or would they be friends with you if you treated them that way? Anyway, so good to see you, my old friend. It's just such a joy spending all these years with you. You doing your thing over there, me doing my thing over here, and occasionally crossing paths. But I love the work you're doing, especially with gay and bi men. And just I really appreciate you.